Okay, we're up to Sif Tezvov, Sif 15 in the laws of Mezuzah. I had alluded to this last week, and I just found that it was hard to find people talking about this because it's, I don't know how to say, an accordion / folding door in Hebrew. But here there's a little diagram, which you could see those type of movable partitions, which it kind of looks like a permanent wall, but then they're also movable. And when the wall is closed, there's this little door in there. So the author of this book writes as follows. He says, it seems that a doorway that is built into a folding wall is exempt from a mezuzah because it's temporary. However, there is an authority that holds that one should fix a mezuzah while the wall is set up and spread out. However, no blessing is recited. And in the footnote, he quotes Shraga HaMeir. Shraga HaMeir is Rav Shneibal Galav Shalom, who was the Rav of the Visions community in London. And he says that over here, the case we're talking about in Shulchan Aruch is where the dwelling is temporary. Here, the dwelling is permanent. It's just within the dwelling, that wall is temporary. But also another thing which he doesn't. Anyway, so the bottom line is he says you put up a mezuzah without a bracha. The question that I have is, what if it's not temporary? What if you have that wall and it's there the whole time, and once every other year, when you have something very extraordinary going on, you open the wall to the side, right? So some places have such walls. For example, just locally, if you go to, let's say, Eichenstein Shul on the Van, they have such a wall which splits the whole shul into two. And during the week, every week, during the week, the shul is split into two, and on Shabbos they open it up. So I get it. But what if you have it up the whole time, and just on Yom Kippur, where you have so many people coming for Kol Nidre or for Yizkor, then you open it. So then maybe it's permanent. And then the question becomes that it's not just, okay, just put up a mezuzah, but when you fold up the wall, so now there's no mezuzah there, there's no doorpost anymore, but the mezuzah is still there. Then you close it, and the mezuzah finds itself back in its place. Do you then run into a problem of tasa v'lo min ha'osui? Like we said before, you can't say stick the mezuzah onto a piece of wood and then affix the wood to the door, right? So at least in theory, I could hear an argument that would say that you have to take down and reaffix the mezuzah every time you close that wall. Anyway, I don't know, practically speaking, we'll have to figure this out. All right. A porch that has 3 partitions and a ceiling above them, but is open on the 4th side, even though it has 2 columns on the 4th side in the form of a doorway, requires no mezuzah because the columns are not made for the purpose of forming door posts, rather to support the ceiling. However, if there is also a partition on the 4th side, even though the partitions are low and do not extend to the ceiling, and even though they are constructed with many open spaces, a mezuzah is required. So I'll show you some pictures of this. So for example, here, you see that little diagram over there. So underneath, actually, Bob, you have this right by your back door, right? So you have those little beams, but those beams are not there to form doorposts. They're just there to support the wall, the structure on top. So it doesn't need to have a mezuzah. Similarly, here he shows you where you have a sort of living room situation with those 2 beams, where again, maybe I should stop sharing the screen so you'll see it bigger. Hold on. Right, so those 2 beams, they may be there to form so that there should be a separate room over there, but more often than not, which can be the case, but more often than not, those beams are just there as structural beams, and therefore no mezuzah is required. But here's where the contrast comes. If you essentially what he's saying over here is if you have 4 walls, it's different. So if you look at this diagram, where you have this sort of structure around all these beams, they're all there to support the ceiling, no mezuzah is required. But that very same structure with wall in it, like such, now we're going to say, obviously those walls don't reach all the way to the ceiling, But those very same beams, which without that wall I attributed to supporting the ceiling, now I'm saying no, those beams also serve as a doorpost and require mezuzah. Now this is very, sorry? No, not every one of them, just the ones that you walk through, yeah? Just the one, just this one over here. Now, this is a very common scenario, certainly here in Chicago, where people have these decks with pergolas, which you might use as a sukkah on sukkahs. So it's a deck that has four walls, and it has posts on every side. Ostensibly, they're there just to hold up the pergola part of the deck. But it would seem, at least, so different. I have seen many observant Jews here in Chicago who don't have a mezuzah there, and they say it doesn't need a mezuzah because those beams are there to support the pergola. They're not there as doorposts. And that's a valid opinion. But what, if I'm understanding this correctly, what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is saying is that actually, in such a case, when there's a fourth wall, we would consider it to be a doorpost. Okay. Very important. A base shar, a gatehouse, which is a small hut near the gate of a courtyard in which the watchman stays, or a hallway which serves as a passageway to go up to an attic or to a garden or a corral, are exempt from a mezuzah because these enclosures are not made for dwelling. So an attic, I guess there could be different types of attics, but he's talking here about a little, some sort of small booth, which is a passageway to another place that does not require a mezuzah. So he gives an example of an attic, a garden. A garden here doesn't mean, like in England, where I come from, they call a backyard is called the garden. Here, what a garden means is like a place where you grow vegetables, but that's all you do there. So a garden, a vegetable garden, or a flower garden, well, a flower garden might be made also to sit and spend time there, but a garden where you just grow vegetables doesn't need a mezuzah, and therefore the passageway to it also doesn't need a mezuzah. However, if a house which requires a mezuzah is open to any of these enclosures or to a porch, these enclosures then do require a mezuzah, even for those doors that people enter from a public thoroughfare, right? So even, and one second, and therefore gates of the courtyards and gates of alleyways and gates of provinces and cities all require mezuzah, since houses that require mezuzahs open into them. Even if there are 10 houses and one is open to the other, and that one in turn is open to another, even if the outer 9 houses are all exempt from mezuzah. Let's say you have, for some reason, you have 9 little cubicles all leading toward a big room. So those cubicles are technically exempt from a mezuzah because they're less than 4 amos by 4 amos, right? But they would all be required, but they are all obligated to have a mezuzah by virtue of the fact that they all lead toward this this thing. If the inner house requires a mezuzah, they all require mezuzah, and therefore a gate which opens from a garden to a courtyard is required to have a mezuzah. Others maintain that a gatehouse or a hallway must have mezuzah even if no house opens into them, and therefore one should fix a mezuzah even without a bracha. So, practically speaking, you have a little foyer or something when you come into your house or to your building. That's called a base shar, like we have here in Beis Menachem in the very front. And therefore, even if it's less than daled al daled, does require a mezuzah. Here in this other sefer that I'm using, he points out that obviously an attic is exempt from a mezuzah, but if it's a place where you store things, he's going to say later, a place which is used as a storage house, if your attic is used as storage, then it does require mezuzah. And this sif is also the reason why a staircase, let's say in an apartment building, if it's all Jews, right? A staircase or a hallway, all of those things all need a mezuzah, not because they are rooms that require mezuzah, but because they lead toward rooms that have mezuzah. Now, we know that you don't have mezuzah on a bathroom or a restroom. He's going to say that soon. What about a hallway that leads to a restroom? So if can be any other use to that room, let's say you use it for, you have storage cabinets in that hallway, right? In that passageway. So then in and of itself, it requires a mezuzah. But if all that hallway serves as a passageway to the bathroom, then it does not need a mezuzah. Now, another common example of a base shar is an elevator. An elevator is a base shar to the rest of the building. Now, there's different opinions as exactly how do you put a mezuzah on an elevator, but the minhag our minhag based on the way it was done in 770, where there's an elevator, is that on the ground floor, on the floor of the main entrance, you put the mezuzah on the right going into the elevator, and on all the other floors, the mezuzah is on the right coming from the elevator onto those floors. A bathhouse and a tannery and a mikveh are exempt from mezuzah because they are not used as dignified dwellings. Now, a tannery, the reason why a tannery is not considered dignified is because it's a very smelly place. Perhaps nowadays they have ways of, I would assume that nowadays in tanneries they have ways of somewhat controlling the odor, and the way they have seals on different machines. So perhaps nowadays a tannery might yes be required to have a mezuzah. Here in this sefer that I have here, he quotes that from another. He quotes from the Agam Halacha that an indoor swimming pool does require a mezuzah, perhaps because people are not completely unclothed as they are in a mikveh. Refes Bakar, a stable or room in which birds are raised, or a house in which straw or wood is stored, or storehouses of wine or other drinks that have the dimensions of a house, namely 4 amos by 4 amos, require mezuzah, but others maintain that they are exempt. So practically speaking, a lot of rooms in your house which you don't use, but you use it to store your paint, you have, or whatever, any of those type of things, we would require a mezuzah, though without a bracha. In a place where children are usually found, or in a room where people sometimes bathe or urinate, the mezuzah should be covered. It is only when these practices are occasional that we may rely on the covering. However, if something odious is permanently installed, for example, if a urinal is placed near the mezuzah, we cannot rely merely on covering the mezuzah. Right? So if it's a place with this urinal, so then that's like a bathroom. You take away the mezuzah. But if it's just, this is your bedroom, but sometimes you have kids running around over there naked, so then it's enough to cover the mezuzah, and practically the custom is to rely that you don't need a separate cover as long as you have a non-see-through, like a white or whatever mezuzah cover, that's okay. Interesting to note that even though usually we're machmir to consider erva, to consider the naked a naked person to be a erva, and therefore you're not allowed to do holy things in their presence, even from a very young age. But strictly speaking, it's only from the age of 3 for a girl or 9 for a boy. So perhaps there's also certainly it's a holy thing to try and be in the practice, not to change diapers at all in the face of a mezuzah or anything like that. But for a young baby changing diapers, there is certainly room to be lenient because they're below that age. Okay, a house or a courtyard in which a Gentile also resides is exempt from the mitzvah of mezuzah. This is the opinion of the Ramah. However, the prevalent custom is to be stringent about that, and that if you share some place with a guy, you should put a mezuzah up, albeit without a bracha. So, for example, if you have a 2-flat, right? So you live downstairs and the non-Jew lives upstairs, but then there's the front door and the back door and the basement, the common areas of the building which you share. So then, if you can, you should put mezuzahs in all of those places. Obviously, if they're not going to allow you to, and there's going to be that might cause the non-Jews to disrespect the mezuzah, then you don't do that. You don't put a mezuzah in a place where it could come to being disrespected. Like we mentioned before, there's also in many states, including in Illinois, the mezuzah law, which takes care of these problems usually. Now that's only if it's a shutfas, if it's mainly a non-Jewish place. That's if you're living in a bigger, like for example, we always speak about Winston Towers. Even though the truth is that Winston Towers, we could debate about that because I think there's a strong chance that many of the Winston Towers buildings are at least 50% Jewish. So there may be room to say that there should be mezuzahs on the front door and on the elevators of Winston Towers, but good luck getting the board to accommodate for that. But whatever, other big condo buildings where you're Jewish and there's many, many non-Jews, so then it would not be, then you don't put on mezuzah. But if it's an equal partnership, if it's 50-50, or if it has to be exactly 50-50, but if it's more or less an equal partnership, then we do put up mezuzah. I wonder what they do in Florida in these condos in, Surfside over there, where I'm sure a very large percentage, if not all of the residents are Jewish. Anyway, 20. A seller whose doorposts and doorway are flush with the ground is exempt from the mitzvah mezuzah because they're not considered a doorpost unless it's standing. That means a horizontal doorway, right? Where you have a staircase going down, instead of having a door to go to the stairs, it's like a trap door in the floor. Actually, in New York, you see that a lot on the street. Actually, they have the entrance to the store just from these horizontal doorways. So horizontal doorways doesn't mean. Okay, very important halacha. If you rent a house outside of Eretz Yisrael, you are exempt from mezuzah for 30 days because it is not considered a permanent dwelling during this time. Now, here's a good time to debunk some myths over here. First of all, this is only if you rent a house outside of Eretz Yisrael. If you buy a house, then you have to put up a mezuzah right away. The very first day that you live in the house, you have to make sure you have mezuzahs on. There's no 30-day allowance. Unfortunately, I've seen so many times where people buy houses and they rely on the quote-unquote 30-day allowance, which is non-existent. If you buy the house, you must put up a mezuzah right away. And in addition to that issue, I've seen, and again, it surprises me sometimes, but even very observant, devout Jews who somehow the 30 days gets delayed into 30 weeks and 30 months, and they just don't get their act together. And it's very important to put up mezuzahs right away. And I've had the opportunity quite a number of times to be there with people on moving day while they're schlepping off stuff from the moving truck to put up the mezuzahs. You can put up the mezuzahs before you move in, as long as once you've started moving in your stuff, you can. So even if, let's say, the movers are coming today, but already a few days before you started bringing in some of your belongings, so then if it's more convenient, you can do it then as well. Now, what if you rent a house? So if you rent a house in Eretz Yisrael, again, there's no difference. There's no 30 days in Eretz Yisrael. You have to put it up right away. Why do you have to put up right away in Eretz Yisrael? So either it's because mitzvah sishav Eretz Yisrael, because there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. So even though usually we consider renting to be temporary, but because it's a mitzvah, so the mitzvah gives it significance, and therefore renting in Israel is not considered temporary. One second. Alternatively, it's because we want to make sure that people. It's sort of a way to make sure that people are going to live in Eretz Yisrael. So this is taking into account what we're going to say in Sif Chaf Beis in the next Sif 22, that when you leave a house, you're not allowed to take down a mezuzah. So we'll discuss some of the details of that momentarily. So if we tell you that in Eretz Yisrael you have to put up a mezuzah right away, so then we're going to make sure. Again, this is talking about temporary renting. So, but if you have to put up a mezuzah right away, then you are going to see to it as much as you can to make sure that the house is never empty, because you want to get paid back for your mezuzahs, and therefore you'll make sure somebody else takes over the house, and that way there'll be more people living in Eretz Yisrael. Now, this leads into what do we do nowadays? Now, when we think of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is talking here about it's not considered a permanent dwelling. Well, why not? And the answer is because that's talking about what we would call today an Airbnb. You rent a house for a day, for a week, if you rent it for more than a month, then it's considered permanent. But less than that, it's not. But if you're renting a house or renting an apartment, and you have a contract that says that this is a 12-month lease, or even without nowadays that's usually the case that you have a contract, right? So then you can say that it's a temporary dwelling, and then therefore, practically speaking, before I said that there's people don't realize that when you buy a house, you don't have 30 days. The truth is that even when you rent a house nowadays, you don't really have the 30 days, because usually when people rent a house, it's with a commitment, whether it's a 12 months or 6 months, but it's a commitment in contract for more than 30 days, and therefore it's very difficult to consider it temporary, and mezuzahs should be placed up right away. Now, the Chabad custom is as follows. Now, some authorities say that if you have a contract for a year, for a whole year, say, then when you put up mezuzahs right away as soon as you move in with a bracha. However, the Chabad custom is that you put up mezuzahs right away the first day that you move in, and then after 30 days, you either switch one of the mezuzahs to a new one, or you take them down to check and you leave it over to the next day, like we said last time, that if you check them overnight, then you do put up make a bracha when you put them back up, and like this, you get both. You get all the best of both worlds. That you have the mezuzahs up right away, and we find a workaround to enable us to say a bracha after 30 days. What about a hotel? Right? So if you live in a hotel for more than 30 days, unfortunately, it happens to people. Let's say if they had a flooding or fires or stuff like that, then often the insurance will put them up in a hotel for extended periods. So if you're in a hotel for more than 30 days in a way that you're sort of actually living there, then there is room to say that you should require a mezuzah. But in places where you're completely not in control and they could move you around any day, like in a hospital or in a prison or anything like that, so then there's no requirement for a mezuzah. If you move away from your house and it is to be occupied by another Jew, you should not remove the mezuzahs, but should leave them there for the new occupant, and the new occupant should pay for them. So we've discussed this halacha in the past a number of times. If another Jew is coming in, then you have to leave the mezuzahs there. If you don't know if another Jew is coming in, if it might be a non-Jew, so then you could take down the mezuzahs with you. And the same if the landlord is a non-Jew, certainly you could, well, it depends. Even if the landlord's not Jewish, if you know that there's a Jew coming in next, then you have to leave it up. Now, we're very strict about this. The Gemara tells stories that it's dangerous. A person could bring himself to a sakana, to a dangerous situation, by taking down a mezuzah. And even though, so the Shulchan Aruch says that the new occupant should pay you for them. But even if the new occupant is not interested in paying for them, either because they're just nasty people, or maybe it's the new occupant is a non-religious Jew who doesn't really care about mezuzahs and is not willing to pay for them, so then it's just too bad. You may not leave the house without mezuzahs. What you can do, a couple of things. First of all, one thing you can do is, if you have beautiful, expensive mezuzahs, you're not obligated to leave those. You could just leave kosher mezuzahs. So, a few days before you move out the house, take down your good mezuzahs, and some poskim say that you shouldn't just take them down randomly, but you should take them down to have them checked. And then instead of replacing them with the same ones, you could replace them with cheaper, sort of just basic kosher mezuzahs, and leave those for the new occupant. Now, what sometimes happens is that you run into a problem where I'm going to leave it for the new occupant. The new occupant might not want to pay me for them. He might want to have he might have his own mezuzahs that he wants to put up, but I can't take down mine before he puts up his. So there's a couple things you could do. This actually happened to me just over a year ago when I bought my house. So until I bought the house, I was renting an apartment, and then I wanted my mezuzahs in the new house, and the guy who I was buying the house from also wanted his mezuzahs to take them with him to his new house. So what we did was you can do this when everyone's on the same page and communicating terms. What we did was as follows. I took down about a week or so before closing, I took down the mezuzahs from my apartment. The truth is, it could have, Yeah, I'll explain to you why I did it before closing. But before we moved out of the apartment, I took down my mezuzahs from the apartment and replaced them with the cheaper mezuzahs that I was leaving on the apartment. And then I went to the house with my mezuzahs together with the new mezuzahs that I had bought, anticipating moving into the house. I took down all of his mezuzahs and I replaced them with mine, and it was his house. And then, he was able to go and he bought his new house and he put them in his new house, and that was all fine. The reason I did it before closing was because after closing, first of all, often the times don't match up. But in my particular case, and this happens also quite commonly, is that he didn't move out after closing. He still lived in the house for a few days. He was for those few days he was renting it from me. He was renting the house from me for those few days. Now, but there is a machlokes whether renting a house has the same degree of obligation as mezuzahs as it does when you own the house. So because there's this concept of tasav elim ha'osli, that mezuzah has to be put up while the door is obligated to have a mezuzah, not, again, like we said before, not that you put it on the piece of wood and then affix it. So had I put up the mezuzah while he was renting it from me, and then I move in, so the mezuzah was put up at a lesser degree of obligation than it was now. So therefore, to circumvent that issue, does that make sense what I'm saying? So to circumvent that issue, I put up the mezuzahs before closing. Now, another thing that sometimes works out, if that can work out for you, that's great. Another thing which I often recommend people to do is that, again, the problem is you're buying a house, you need to put up mezuzahs right away, but you don't yet have though. You want to, you're waiting. Somebody else is going to be moving in next week, and then either he's going to pay you for them or he's going to take them down and put up his own. So what you can often do is borrow mezuzahs. I myself often have spare mezuzahs, but and most seifrim have loaner mezuzahs that they could lend you. And like this, the day you move into your house, you put up mezuzahs right away, the mezuzahs that you borrowed from the seifer, and then a few weeks or whenever you get the chance, you switch them over. You get the mezuzahs from the old place, which you have now which have now been replaced by the new owner, and you put them up in your house, and that's fine. That if you do that, then you also have a way of, like we said before, you do it after 30 days, and then you have a way to make a bracha because you're putting up new mezuzahs over there. Okay. Any questions before we continue? Hello? No. Okay.
Rabbi?
Sorry. Yes.
Did you say on a timeshare that you had to put up mezuzahs if you have a timeshare for 10 days?
Timeshare for 10 days would not require mezuzah. If you had a timeshare for more than 30 days, then you probably would require a mezuzah.
Okay.
Just to make sure I understand this correctly, a timeshare means it's like a hotel or something that people share the room, and you have a certain amount of days or a year that you're allowed to be there. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's ownership.
Right.
It's not a hotel. You own part of it. Right. You own it for a few days.
Right. So you're saying if you own it for a few days, would it require mezuzah? That's an interesting question because it's not renting. That's an interesting question.
Other people shared also, and I don't remember any mezuzahs on it.
Well, the fact that there wasn't a mezuzah may have been an oversight, but I'm just trying to sort of analyze this. If you're saying I own it for these 10 days, so then you would require a mezuzah. But I guess it would depend on the wording in the contract. But if the proper sort of if the actual legal agreement is that we all own it equally, and
right,
we're going to share, we each get the rights to use it for a certain amount of days a year. So then you're in partnership with other people. And partnership with the guy, we said, well, if it's 50-50, then the custom is to put a mezuzah. But if there's 99 goyim and one Jew, or 49 goyim and one Jew, and each one gets it for 1 week a year, then it would be exempt from mezuzah. But a timeshare in Israel or in a place where everybody's Jewish, then it would read a mezuzah.
Okay. Yeah, not everybody was Jewish, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you see the screen?
I can see it.
Okay, one must be diligent to observe the commandment of mezuzah, because it is the obligation of everyone at all times. Wherever you enter or leave your room, you will encounter the oneness, the unity of Hashem, the name of the Holy One, blessed be He. And recalling His love, you will awaken from your slumber. I don't know what that word means.
Lethargy.
It says in the Hebrew, it says from your sleep, and cease going astray after the vanities of the times. You will then realize that nothing endures forever except the knowledge of the Eternal One. This paragraph is basically a paraphrase of the Rambam, and will immediately return to your senses and walk in the path of righteousness. Our sages of blessed memory say that he who has tefillin on his head and his arm, and who has tzitzis on his garment and a mezuzah on his doorpost, is sure not to sin, because he has many reminders, and these are guardian angels who save him and sin. And it is said that the angel of Hashem encamps around those who fear him and sets them free. We say this, and this is from Psalm 34. We say this on the Shabbos davening. So having Hashem encamping around us is in a fan's expression in the mezuzah. Says the blessed memory also say, because of the sin of mezuzah, his sons and daughters may die young, whereas one who is diligent to observe the mitzvah of mezuzah will have his days lengthened, as it is says, we say in the Shema that the mitzvah of mezuzah is in order that your days be lengthened and the days of your children. Now, for us Lubavitchers, we don't need any overemphasizing of this. It's something that we know. The Rebbe sort of drilled this into us very strongly about the importance of being super uber meticulous with the mitzvah of mezuzah. Since the mitzvah of mezuzah serves as a reminder of the oneness of Hashem's name, therefore, when leaving the house and when entering, you should kiss the mezuzah. You should not place your hand directly on the mezuzah itself. It is therefore important to have a glass encasement to cover the name of Hashem. When leaving the house and placing your hand on the mezuzah, you should say, Hashem is my keeper, Hashem is my protector, and by my right hand, Hashem will preserve my going out and my coming in from now until all eternity. Hashem Shemri, Hashem Tzili, Hashem Adamini, Hashem Yishmer Tzesi Yavei Mi'atav Adolam, which is paraphrased from this is a pasuk in Tehillim which says this in the Hashem Shemrecha, Hashem Tzil Chal Adaminecha, Hashem Yishmer Tzesi Chaveyecha Mi'atav Adolam. That's two different verses in Tehillim which say Hashem is your keeper, Hashem is your protector. By your right hand, Hashem will preserve your going out and your coming in from now until all eternity. So this the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch here is bringing a custom to say that about once, to sort of switch it into the tense talking about yourself, and say that Lamaisa there's different customs actually about what to do when you walk. He talks about putting your hand on the case of the mezuzah and kissing it. Some authorities bring a custom to actually kiss the mezuzah, not to kiss your hand, to reach your lips to the mezuzah and kiss it. Some have the custom, and I believe this was the Rebbe's custom, to just touch the mezuzah but not kiss it. And in others forum, it's brought that when you walk past the mezuzah, you touch it, kiss it, you should have in mind to accept upon yourself the unity of Hashem and the subservience to Hashem. The mezuzah of an individual should be examined 2 times every 7 years, and one belonging to a group, in order to avoid excessive exertion, should be examined 2 times every 50 years. And in the Sfarim over here, he brings down over here in the Sefer that when we say by the mezuzah belonging to the public only needs to be checked twice in 50 years, it's talking about, for a mezuzah on a country, on a city, on a public place. But the mezuzahs of shuls, of bata midrashim, of partner, those things that, there's people in charge. The Rabbi who does the caretaker, manages the building. So part of managing the building is also to check the mezuzahs. And of course, we know the Rabbi encouraged based on the Mat Ephraim, to check mezuzahs even more often than that. and if possible, every 12 months to have the mezuzahs, at least once every 12 months, to have your mezuzahs checked. Okay, that brings to a conclusion the laws of mezuzahs, and the next chapter goes back towards preparation for prayer and the correct place for prayer, etc. Stop recording.